They sat on a blanket on the 8th green at the spring golf course. Randall used to caddy there when he was a kid, hitting the links every now and then when he turned 18, just before he headed off to serve. Back then, like the housing, it was affordable. It had also been open to the public, and getting a tee time was never a problem. Now the course was private and the membership fee was beyond rational. Most of the locals had been priced out, having to travel as far as an hour or more away to play around. Randall may not have had the expendable funds to buy a membership, but he still knew where the breaks were in the surrounding fences. The 8th green was on top of a hilly section that overlooked a pond and the rolling greens below, and the panoply of stars above. He'd always wanted to take a girl out here when he was a caddy. That's all. It reminds us of what's really important, which is the price of golf memberships.
It's important. Hello and welcome back to the SBU English Club podcast, the best critique group that nobody asked for. I am your host, Andrew.
And I'm Jay.
Wow, we are dead serious once again.
The American heartland is in peril, Andrew. This is no time for japes.
Right. We've received a call to arms in the form of a novel from a returning member. What I love about this season is how many people are coming back and how many new books that we're seeing. It allows us to really critique things on a deeper level. We have J.A. Johnstone and her deceased uncle, William Johnstone, back with Not My Home, a thriller for the modern age in a way that even Trigger Warning wasn't.
It makes Trigger Warning feel dated.
It really does.
This is the new and improved model.
J.A. Johnstone seems to have taken a lot of pages out of such works as, what was it called?
True Allegiance?
True Allegiance. I completely forgot it.
If it makes you feel better, I also had to Google the name of it earlier because I was going to mention it in my summary. I legitimately couldn't remember the title of the book at all.
One could be forgiven for believing that America is under siege, or at least the small, wholesome towns in the South are under siege by waves of liberals coming in from the city.
Gang-age liberals, as Ben Shapiro might say.
Gang-age liberals! The similarities were so interesting to me. But yeah, so the idea is the sudden arrival of big city elites in small town America triggers a violent wave of protests and possibly a civil war. I got very angry. I laughed and I screamed. I jumped at least twice. I'll get to that in my summary. But J.A., I'm so happy to have you back. It's been a long time since we've talked to you and Will. We've really played the field of this brand of paranoid thriller.
I think that we're experts in this at this point after having braved the fires of Trigger Warning, of True Allegiance. I would even argue of Nova's Playlist.
Yes!
I think that we are ready to tackle another reactionary thriller
in
more depth than we have yet.
And I was actually pretty excited for this one too, kind of like how Red is to acid trips. This book kind of hit close to home for me. I don't know if this is like a biased disclosure or just Andrew lore. Once I graduated from the real life SBU, I chose consciously to move back to my small southern hometown in a way that's very similar to a lot of the characters here. And I've seen real and imagined versions of this problem described in the book. So I'm in a unique position to really help our fellow student and friend J.A. Johnstone here. So this is going to be exciting.
I'm actually going to be looking to you a lot for, realism checks on this novel as it pertains, as you were saying, to small town living, because there were moments where even when it was feeling a little bit paranoid, I had this glimmer of a sense that maybe this is an actual problem that's being distorted through the lens of this book. So I'll be curious to see what is real and what is just purely delusion.
So J.A., I'm sure after our great critique of Trigger Warning, which was I guess 3 years ago,
unbelievably
a lot of years, I'm sure you're ready for more. I've heard that this is an annual thing you do with these thrillers. We'll get into that a little bit later. So I'm really glad you came back, and we will launch right into our summary and specific critiques.
All right, so once again, Andrew and I have split the summary in half, and I will be taking the lead on the first half. So my section will be a little bit long. I'm going to be laying a lot of groundwork. A lot occurs.
So much.
And the novel actually takes a twist halfway through that I wasn't expecting. It's like a little bit cleverer narratively than I thought it was going to be.
My media literacy must be screwed because I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, I think I was just like fully underestimating this book. But if I don't mention explicitly what I'm talking about by the time I get to the end of this, remind me, because I really actually do want to point it out. A little bit unlike Trigger Warning, we're starting with this like intro grabber scene, I think that's what they're called in thrillers, that does not center our main character. Instead, we open on Randall and Ashley Early, a young military couple who've just returned to Randall's hometown of Springerville, South Carolina. The book immediately establishes that this is a place that it knows no change. It is truly idyllic. It is Arcadia. Despite having been away for years, Springerville is basically the same as Randall remembers it. All the old establishments are still there, including like the bar, the luncheonette, and some shops on the main drag. Most of them are even run by the same people, but there's an insidious change occurring. There's been a recent influx of city folk, allegedly looking for cheap housing, which has driven up the prices of housing, of course, and also made it difficult for local business owners to open businesses because all of the nicest lots on the main street are being filled in with cyber cafes, ? And boutique soap shops / weed dispensaries, ?
Yeah.
It's right here that I just have to note that a huge amount of page space is dedicated to the real problem in the community, which is, of course, the increase in the price of golf memberships. Poor Randall, has been priced out of the very golf course he used to work at as a teenager. The housing and golf crisis are so bad that Randall and Ashley are having to live with Randall's parents until they can find a place in town that they can actually afford, which, as blue-blooded working adults, makes them feel, as Rich Shapiro would say, doubly shamed.
Right. And especially right after their honeymoon. It's not exactly an aphrodisiac or whatever they said. Just as a grounding point, this is supposed to be in South Carolina, specifically 40 minutes away from Charleston. And I did a little bit of digging on Google Maps, and I couldn't help but notice that there is a small, quaint little southern town about 40 minutes away from Charleston. Color be surprised to learn that this is called Somerville. So just keep that in mind. Yes.
No, it's not.
They just shifted the season over a little bit.
Which is,
I don't know why they did that. I mean, it's not like a bad thing, but it just like stuck with me. I'm like, this is like a real place that they're talking about.
what does it mean?
And I don't know if like Somerville is like going through these problems, but it was just funny to me.
Oh, I wonder if we should check the local news and see if anything like this is happening.
I know.
Maybe that's outside our purview.
Yeah. Too real.
It's too real. So Randall has all these problems. He doesn't want to think about that tonight, though. Tonight, he wants to have sex with his hot wife in a field.
Yes.
So they're about to do that when, unfortunately, and quick warning for all of our listeners, it's about to get intense in a sexual way, and this is not the only time that's going to happen.
No.
So I will try to remember to warn you every time. They are assaulted by masked and hooded thugs who beat Randall up, and as we will soon learn, R-word Ashley, to the point where she is concerned that she might be pregnant. That does not end up occurring, but that is a concern of hers at one point. Without giving away too much critique too early, this opening chapter I think is really revealing thematically in a way I think kind of fits into the summary. This tells us a lot about the world of Not My Home. This is a place where all change is perceived as threatening, where the villains are capital O outsiders, motivated by a desire to destroy what is capital G good.
Yes.
We're working in this kind of Jordan Petersonian archetypal world. And the protagonists are martyrs or victims, which is ironic because this book is going to frequently decry victim mentalities, as Trigger Warning did as well, if I recall.
Yes.
So.
But unlike Trigger Warning, we open up with like Ashley and Randy are going to have sex.
Yeah.
And like sex wasn't even mentioned in Trigger Warning. So already things are very ugly and mean.
Yeah.
In a way that I think will probably permeate through the rest of the story. So keep those words in mind.
Yeah, I think mean is such a great word. In our next chapter, we're going to actually meet our main character. His name is Gus Fuller, also a military man, a townie, and a proprietor of the local quote-unquote luncheonette. That's the last time you're ever going to hear me say that word because I hate it.
It's an awful freaking word.
It's a deli.
Yeah.
It's a deli. It's a deli cafe.
Yeah.
It's just your typical another broken egg or first watch or whatever.
A diner, yeah.
Diner. That's a better word. Anyway, some of Gus's regulars come in. It's like whatever. They're having breakfast. And then they hear the news about Randall and Ashley the night previous. The characters make note of the attackers' hoods and masks,
Yes.
which they use as an opportunity to springboard into a comment about how useless masks were during COVID.
Yes.
Unless, as Gus notes, you're trying to hide your identity in order to do crime, then the masks are really useful.
And this book was published like last month.
Yeah.
When was the last time like any of us have thought about masks?
I don't know. Not in that way, certainly. For the remainder of this chapter, Gus and the other locals lament the influx of what they're going to start calling locusts, which is their term for people who move in from out of town, what normal people would call transplants. I don't hate this as a term. I hate that it's being applied to just these like normal people.
Right.
But it's like it's a good enough insult. And they ponder whether change is coming or if it has already arrived.
That's what makes it a thriller, is you could go bop, bop, bop after everything.
That is what makes it a thriller. I feel so thrilled. I think it's the constant suggestion that something's about to happen.
Yeah, the fear-mongering call to arms in every single sentence.
Yeah. This book wants you to be afraid of everybody that is not you. Okay, so then in chapter 3, we're finally going to meet our main antagonist, Braden Stranger.
What a name.
I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't think there's anything like quippy I could say about great name that like wouldn't also be its own cliche.
It wouldn't sound out of place in Lightlark. That's probably the meanest thing I could say about it.
No, they would have called him like Braden. I don't know the
whatever the Spanish word for stranger is.
I was gonna say fremd, but I was like, I don't think she's used German anywhere else.
That is no.
But that's what makes him a stranger. Okay, anyway, this is a character, fortunately, whom we will all have some familiarity with already because he is President Prescott from Ben Shapiro's 5-star novel True Allegiance.
Literally.
He's the same guy, except if in the character creator you took the evil slider and you bumped it up like a couple notches. I think he's a little bit more explicitly dark of heart. But in all other meaningful ways, he's basically Prescott. He is a self-interested careerist whose few introspective moments are going to be some of the closest the book is ever going to veer into like interesting territory.
Yeah.
We also learn right away that he's come to Springerville at the behest of a mysterious faceless cabal, specifically to become mayor.
Yeah.
What the cabal wants beyond that doesn't make itself known right away, but we know that it has something to do with moving wealthy urbanites into rural communities and changing them from the inside.
I want to state here how nebulous this group of people is. They're referred to pretty much consistently hereafter as his benefactors. This probably is going to be a deeper discussion later on in this episode, but in case it's not going to be obvious right off, the narrative is all but inviting you to put a lot of parentheses around that word. I really find that deeply uncomfortable. It's really bad.
Yeah, a bad number of parentheses, especially given that one of the few things we do eventually learn about them is that they're headquartered in New York.
Right.
So don't love that.
Don't like that at all.
Basically, during this scene, the book really wants you to know that on top of his disingenuous character traits, what substance Stranger does have is to be the subject of our scorn as readers. He works remotely, which means that he's lazy.
Yep.
He meditates, which is lib shit. And he drinks expensive wine rather than the rustic proletariat beer. So we don't like him, and everything he does is bad and stupid and dumb.
Correct.
He also hates his ex-wife, who will periodically call and nag him. These scenes are really strange to me because both Stranger and his wife are being positioned within the narrative as like worthy of our mockery. So I feel like this is just meant to demonstrate, to like sort of play out for us in like a morality play kind of way, that like these urban elite wealthy relationships are just inherently broken, and they lead to unhappiness all around, and they lead to a child who's not being properly cared for. And it's just showing us how pitiable these people are. Okay, so next we're going to transition back to Gus, who's going to go and learn whatever he can about the situation in Randall with Ashley by seeing them in the hospital. He is going to encounter both of their parents there, and Ashley's parents, who are natives of Chicago, are in the middle of blaming Randall's parents for what happened. Randall's parents, being the noble rustics that they are, respond with this sort of befuddled serenity to all these accusations that this wouldn't have happened to Ashley if she hadn't moved down here. Mm-hmm. And Gus does his best to respond to the conflict, and he kind of helps resolve it, and it just doesn't really come up again, ever. He returns to the deli. There he meets up with his girlfriend, Emma, a local school teacher, who I got the impression was a good bit younger than him. I don't know if that's explicitly stated, but something about her seems not as old as Gus is.
I definitely got that impression as well. And again, not for any specific reason. I think it's just the vibes between them. Kind of a Noah Imzara kind of deal where it's probably not a big age gap, but it's felt.
Yeah, I didn't think it was like weird. I just noticed it. Mm-hmm. The two of them sit in the deli for a while and lament how awful things are now that there's so many transplant kids down in the school. It's making Emma's life really hard. They even have this new principal who's a transplant from like San Francisco or something, and he's annoying, I guess. I don't know. We don't like him because he's from elsewhere.
Right? He's like a Khajiit.
Okay, so in the next chapter, we meet Wally. This is the current mayor of Springerville.
Wally Sturgis.
Wally
what
Sturgis.
A name. Again.
You know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
The window of his car gets smashed, and he learns firsthand that it's not just wealthy urban elites that have begun to flood town, but roving thugs as well. He is nervous about the upcoming election against Stranger, in part because he's just like really old and tired and doesn't want to run again, but he feels like he doesn't have a choice because to not run would just be to hand the town over.
Right.
And then the chapter ends, basically. We then get introduced to another point of view character, Chris Banks. He is a local mechanic and a good friend of Gus's. Andrew, you're cringing. You're cringing, Andrew. Why are you cringing? Is something bad about to happen?
No, I think there's nothing wrong with this character, but I just get this weird sense that bad things are going to be done with him narratively that are problematic and have implications that are unsavory.
It's funny that you say that because I'm checking my notes again, and the next thing it says is that a couple walks by him while he's working in the mechanic shop and shouts Black Lives Matter at him unprompted, which is how the narrative tastefully teaches us that he's black. And he lectures them about how that's just liberal news media bullshit. And that they shouldn't be listening to that kind of garbage.
Obviously, that's a very cringe situation for them to do. But what I don't like about this scene is Banks goes on to say that, like, oh, I've never experienced, like, any racism ever. I love this small town. And, like, no. It's weird to do that to someone, but also no, racism is real. I'm sorry that you have to hear it from me. Someone somewhere has said something.
Yeah.
I can't believe that.
It's worth highlighting that like what this like liberal couple is doing is like very annoying and weird and uncomfortable and bad.
Yes.
But like his response is also very strange.
Horrible,
for a number of reasons.
Right.
But his day is not getting any better, unfortunately, because he soon thereafter misgenders a non-binary customer who then calls him a filthy caveman when he expresses confusion as to what non-binary people are or what that term means. So I guess put a pin in that because that's not the only like evil non-binary character we're going to encounter.
Nope. Especially around bathrooms.
Yeah, especially around bathrooms. Gus shows up just in time to witness sort of the end of this little debacle and then reflect with Chris sort of elbow nudging each other about just how wacky and upside down the world is these days. You just can't tell left from right anymore. We then cut to Stranger working on his campaign strategy, and we also get introduced to Roger, who is his right-hand man. Mm-hmm. Roger's like this little shrimpy, kind of not so dedicated to Stranger's mysterious cause kind of guy.
He had lived in Springerville, right?
Yes, as a child, he had been partly raised there, but then moved away.
So he's got like this internal conflict there.
Yeah. And he's, you know, he's a little bit of an opportunist, but not quite as much of a careerist as Stranger is, I would say. They helpfully for us, though, as readers, discuss what their plan is going to be for the election. It's basically going to consist of astroturfing on 2 levels. First, they're going to move as many people down to Springerville as they can as quickly as possible. They're going to set them up in available houses, and in particular in this one trailer park,
which just happens to be completely empty.
Stage 2, or level 2, is going to be using their New York connections to begin developing new properties around town, I believe, so that wealthy people can buy them and then legally be residents of Springerville and therefore vote, but not actually be physically there. We then are back to Gus and Chris hanging out. They're at this local bar called the Ironworks. It's going to come up quite a bit from here on out. They're sad / confused / disgruntled by the number of beanies in the crowd as opposed to trucker and cowboy hats.
Yes.
Emma walks in, and we get this moment where every man in the bar gets horny about her. Then Wally joins the group, and through a very contrived misunderstanding that I refuse to rehash, a bar fight breaks out between the locals and the transplants. Wally gets caught up in the middle of it, and as he is old, he has a heart attack, effectively removing him from the mayoral race. So this is kind of the inciting incident of the book,
I guess.
And as you may have noticed, that's like very far in.
Yeah, because we have to get all the scenes with the townies and talk about how much they used to love their lives before these people started moving in.
Yes, briefly circling back, speaking of the townies, to the very first Gus scene in the deli diner place. The locals that I mentioned that are introduced are all named. There's like a lot of named locals.
So many freaking names.
And then we get introduced to a few more in the bar scene I just summarized. So like there's a lot of characters whose names I'm just not even going to say because they don't really have arcs. They will serve like a single role, which is like if they're a fighter to fight off a guy when Gus is being attacked, if they're like a supportive old lady to like emotionally support Gus after a low moment. And that's all they do. So they're there and they're around, but that's it.
My summary is just going to call them townies. They're a nebulous group. The exact constituent parts vary by scene, but they all have the same idea.
Yeah, they all are basically just different masks on the same skeleton.
Kind of like Fourth Wing in a way.
Very much so. The next day at the diner, everybody wonders what's going to happen to the mayoral race now that Wally is effectively out. That Gus will run instead is a foregone conclusion, narratively speaking, though he's going to like sort of deny that it's going to happen for a while in a way that I guess is supposed to like increase the tension or the stakes or something, but it really just feels like he's
humble and noble.
The next day, Gus is closing up the diner when some young adults try to force their way inside and they're like demanding something to eat.
Yeah.
Gus and Emma do manage to shoo them off, but not before noticing them eating gummy bears out of a strange unmarked bag, which Emma concludes must be the weed, which explains this is supposed to explain their unusual aggression somehow. Because if there's one thing about people who are stoned and hungry, it's that they're like really nasty and mean about it.
They'll kill you for some diner food.
They will cut you for a home-style fry. Gus is shaken up by this near assault, and Emma tries to use this opportunity to convince him to run for mayor again. As they're walking home, they notice one of their elderly neighbors is like screaming for help, and she's cradling this like seemingly dying child in her arms. It turns out that this kid is overdosing after having been drugged by an out-of-town kid that she was like on a date with. So they call 911 and they get her to the hospital, and she'll pop up again later, but like really she doesn't matter.
No.
She just serves to tell us that like there's now dangerous drug activity in the community and it's being forced upon unsuspecting youths. Meanwhile, Stranger checks in on a group of New England ruffians. He's moved into the local trailer park. He just checks in on them. That's the whole scene. They are there. We established that they exist.
Yep.
This might be the first named instance of Sniper, who is our other main antagonist, but like he doesn't really do anything here, so we'll get back to him in a second. The next day, though, Gus holds his first campaign rally at the deli. It's attended by a bunch of locals, and then it's nearly disrupted by this non-binary out-of-towner, a different one, who demands to be taken to the nearest gender-neutral restroom immediately and gets very incensed when other gendered restrooms are suggested based on their appearance. I don't think the novel explicitly says this, but like there's something fishy about them and the timing. It kind of seems like maybe they were a bad actor paid to interrupt this event or to cause Gus to be seen as some kind of bigot, but it doesn't work. Emma ushers this person out of the way. Gus gives a little speech, and then A brick shatters the diner's front window. Bum, bum, bum. And then the conflict is immediately resolved when they catch the vandal before he can escape by motorcycle.
Yep.
And he is arrested. Deciding that the attacker was probably paid off by a stranger, Gus decides to confront him in person. This leads to Gus going to Stranger's house and having this absolutely nothing conversation where they just kind of trade indirect and menacing remarks as they circle around the living room, I guess, like sharks.
But it's important to note that Stranger yassified an old lady's house.
Yes.
This used to be so full of character, but then he painted everything white.
It's like sterile now. It's scary. It's like a hospital.
Right. Like a hospital.
Hospital chic. We're supposed to dislike it because it's a thing that Stranger did, I guess.
Yeah.
It does sound ugly, but it's like a parody of like a modern house. It doesn't feel like a real place.
Right.
Anyway, so they have this nothing conversation. The stakes are not raised. The plot is not advanced, except that this is like maybe the first time that they have a more direct confrontation. Gus and Chris then go to investigate Stranger's trailer park full of ruffians, and then they meet Sniper, who we now learn is an ex-con and the de facto leader of these New England thugs. He is threatening, and then they leave.
Yep.
Weeks pass as Gus works the campaign trail. He attempts to win the votes of high schoolers by offering them, like, free meals. And despite efforts to dig up some dirt on Stranger, he struggles to find anything that he could use to his advantage. One afternoon, though, Stranger visits the deli and offers to set up this debate. This seems like it might be a thing that's going to happen, but then the locals kind of talk Gus out of it, and the plot completely stagnates.
Right? I was looking forward to this debate. I was like, maybe something would come out of this. Maybe it'll echo like the Trump-Clinton debate, because that seems like the cultural touch point that people would go for here. But no, nothing.
I bet there was a debate in a previous draft, and they realized that it just sort of repeated things that the characters have said before.
Yeah, maybe.
Because like none of these characters in like an extended dialogue interaction would have much to say to each other because they all are so flat.
Yeah.
The novel then checks in on Randall and Ashley to remind us that they exist, and that Randall intends to hunt down and kill Ashley's attackers if he is able to find them. Mm-hmm. During all of this, Gus and some locals have been working on a plan to counterbalance some of Stranger's astroturfing efforts. The plan is weird. It kind of goes something like this. On a Saturday, they decide to lure all of the liberals to the local bar by serving unlimited free IPAs, which I guess is like a siren song to you if you're a liberal.
Yeah.
This works. The bar is flooded with the out-of-towners. Everybody gets drunk. They start a fight as planned, which gives the police an excuse to arrest them en masse and hold them in cells so that they aren't able to vote. So like the vote is like the next day or a day or two later, and they're just going to hold them in jail so they can't vote.
To be fair, this was never realized, and this might also not even be the first instance of this happening, but this is where it really kind of dawned on me how cruel these people are being to these locusts, because it's mentioned that, oh, maybe we'll get some of them on DUI charges, which, like, inducing someone to drive under the influence not only endangers their human lives, but also presumably the lives of the townies that you care about. Mm-hmm. So why is this part of your plan? The collateral damage is just ridiculous to me, and they're so mean about it. Like, I don't want anyone to die in a drunk driving accident, even if I hate them.
Yeah, and speaking of the townies that they're supposed to care about, the bar is like totally destroyed by this. I mean, it's like still usable, but like they make reference multiple times to like in what a terrible state it's in, and Gus is like, I hope I can help pay to fix it up, but it's like you ruined this poor person's business. I mean, with consent, but still, it's like
it had to be done.
Yeah, it had to be done, I guess. Anyway, their plan works, goes off without a hitch, and the next day there's a celebration. Stranger shows up and is vaguely menacing, referencing some like big things coming. It's very vague. Then Gus and some friends hit the bar to wait for the election results, which the election itself happened off screen and the results are being counted off screen. Wally is there, so we know he didn't die of the heart attack. He's basically recovered. And Ashley and Randall are also there, having both gotten out of the hospital. The group, while they're waiting for the votes to come in, laments the fact that they haven't been able to find Ashley's assaulter, but as luck would have it, the killer is in this very room, so to speak, because she recognizes the guy by his voice, and he's in the bar right then. Randall then springs into action. He starts beating the guy, and here's the second warning in my section for sexual violence. He gets a pool cue out and is preparing to R-word the guy in an act of vengeance when our main characters pull him off, at which point the thug is arrested. Then the TV announces that Gus won the election. Yay!
Hooray! It's in the same breath this happens.
Yeah, it could be overlapping.
More on that later.
Then we switch to Stranger, who gets a call from his mysterious employer, and he's being informed that it's time to shift to Plan B. Bum, bum, bum.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's probably where I should have ended my section, but I have one more chapter to summarize, and it goes a little something like this. After the election, petty crime increases noticeably. Meanwhile, some kind of trouble is brewing at the trailer park full of thugs. A strange thing to be happening at a thug-themed trailer park, but I digress.
Themed trailer park.
Gus and Chris go to Stranger's house and try to talk things through, but some armed thugs, including Sniper, prevent their entry. Despite having guns pulled on them, Chris and Gus are able to beat the thugs up and gain entry to the home, at which point Stranger is like, I'm not talking to you. You're leaving. And then they do.
And then they do. After breaking these people's arms, they're like, hey, all right, if you say so, it's your house.
Far be it from me to intrude on another man's property.
Yeah, castle law. They want to be offended because then it makes them survivors of some great tragedy that they can trade on. You're not with the in crowd if your sensibilities haven't been assaulted to the point where you can say you're both a victim and a survivor, Emma said. Gus couldn't take his eyes off the crowd. Is that what drives all of this? I'm around children all day. Being a victim is very important to them, at least when they get older and exposed to social media. Mix that in with the concept of adulting as something to avoid, and we have millions of wounded souls who refuse to grow up. It's a very dangerous concoction. Picking up right where we left off. Oh boy. The Gus election team puts on a parade for his victory, but Gus is just so noble and selfless that he wants it to be focused on the holiday season. As they're on this mayoral float, they see a lot of unfamiliar faces in the crowd who aren't cheering, and we get the first mention of the secret dark villain that plagues every single one of these stupid books, I swear to God. The media.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure this is the first time when the media shows up. There's like news vans or whatever. The crowd starts booing and throwing eggs at them and stuff. This is directly likened to the election of Donald Trump, which I think is funny. It's here, genuinely, that I experienced my first ever literary jump scare. The word racist in giant Comic Sans.
Yeah.
I literally jumped reading that. It's like, they call him, what do they call him? Election thief and a TERF. And not to split hairs, but a TERF is the one thing that Gus categorically is not.
No.
I'm sorry. If you are mean to a non-binary person, you are not inherently a TERF.
No.
At no point did Gus say, my feminism is incompatible with your trans experience. So I just think it's the funniest choice of words to use there.
It also feels so out of place in a book like this.
Yeah.
Like, it feels too direct.
It feels direct and directly misused, like a laser-guided missile that just exploded in completely the wrong place, which is really disappointing because something that I praised Trigger Warning for is at least they used like the liberalisms correctly, like a patriarchal microaggression they could come up with an example for, but they don't know how to use TERF correctly. It's just weird. The riots get more violent and then they need to start retaliating because people are just like climbing up the float and like trying to grab them or whatever. But Banks stops Gus and says, wait, Gus, don't fight back. These protesters are black.
Black.
And this might be taken out of context by the media. So let me handle them. Like, come on.
Banks is Chris's last name, by the way, so this is the mechanic.
Right, sorry. I refer to him as Banks because that's what the narrative does, but it's Chris Banks, the mechanic. He is black, and he's like, let me fight these black protesters. But it's okay because here are some white protesters that you can fight. So Banks is fighting the black protesters, Gus is fighting the white protesters, and then the chief of police, Dawn James, who is a woman, and that's like diversity points, I guess, saves them.
And she was injured in Iraq and 9/11. The worst year of her life.
Which I guess, yeah, probably would be.
Yeah.
But very strange character. They at the police station or wherever the secondary location they go to is, they do some investigation, and it turns out the nidus of the protest was this social media disinformation campaign ostensibly orchestrated by strangers' benefactors. This segment is also really funny to me because they watch one of these social media videos, and the scene is presented, blocked, and written like a cable news announcement. Like this quote unquote social media influencer is like, my name is Ashley Influencer, and I'm here in Springerville where we're protesting the election of a racist mayor. Like it feels like cable news. It's not like something that's gonna go on TikTok or whatever.
No, if it was on TikTok, it would be like, POV, you're at the racist mayor election. Or it'd be like, I went to the election of the racist mayor in Springerville, South Carolina.
Right. So in the video, they show this Polaroid of a young Gus with the car from Dukes of Hazzard, which is such a cultural and generational reach that it actually kind of works for something like this to happen. Like, I barely know what Dukes of Hazzard is through cultural osmosis. There was like one episode of My Name is Earl where they talk about it and play Eastbound and Down, and I like that song, but like, I did not remember that there was a giant Confederate flag on the top of that car. So like, it does kind of make sense if someone without the context of Dukes of Hazzard, because no one knows what Dukes of Hazzard is anymore, sees that car, they're going to be like, yeah, that's a racist car. And, you know, I could see someone in good faith posing with one who's like a fan of the show and didn't know any better. So like, I could see how this could get someone canceled. So good job, J.A.
This is definitely a broken clock moment. Like, things just align coincidentally in this syzygy of sense that it doesn't raise too many questions. But this is one of 2 times that's going to happen.
Literally. So the injustice of it all drives Gus into a rage, and he literally like gesticulates like, I can't be racist. Look who's my best friend. And he points to Banks, who is black, and we get reminded of this again. So
Banks, who is presumably still fending off black protesters at that very moment. No, I'm just kidding. They moved to a secondary location. But it's funny to imagine that they're reaching through the window and he's like punching them through the bars or something at the police station.
So Gus apparently keeps like boxes of Polaroids because he's so old-fashioned. He doesn't even have them digitized. And that means that since they have the Polaroid, then someone must have broken into his house. And this is the first time I remember the book mentioning that Gus has a deceased wife named Annette. I could be wrong about this. I talked to Jay, and Jay also didn't know. I have a paper copy, so I can't really control F, but it was really weird to me that this is one of the only mentions of this supposedly really important figure in Gus's life.
Yeah, I thought it had been mentioned earlier, but I might have incepted that in fully. It almost seems like the narrative needed a way to explain his younger girlfriend, who he's not married to, but seems to like live with part-time. I'm imagining the target demographic of this book might want some answers as to why that situation between them arose.
Yeah.
This sort of extramarital situation.
Right? Yeah, there were a lot of characters introduced up front, so I'm perfectly willing for this to be my fault, but I have no idea. Anyways, Gus decides that he needs to clear his mind with his usual routine, but his house has been swarmed by the media. and they're just like watching, waiting for him to say something racist. I don't know what the media is trying to like gain. It's like the FBI is casing his house. He arrives at the diner to find all of the windows broken and everything inside is just smashed apart. The stalwart home of 3 generations ruined. Need I remind you that this book opens on a brutal assault? Of course, Stranger is the likely culprit of this horrible act of violence, which completely unparalleled in this book. Speaking of Stranger, we shift focus to him, and he's having a hard time keeping Roger's head in the game. Roger didn't sign up to do something so horrible as destroying this beautiful luncheonette. They make Gus sound like John Wick in a way. I don't know if you got this, Jay, but they were like, oh no, we've just given him a reason to keep fighting. We're screwed now.
I didn't catch that at all, but you're so right.
But yeah, they just like hype up Gus, who's like just a completely normal guy.
He did beat up those armed thugs with Chris's help, but
I guess. Yeah, I don't know, but Stranger's ready for whatever war is coming now. The next day, and this is the very next scene, they double vandalize the luncheonette. They have spray painted, and I quote, sexist, racist, election thief turf on like the plywood over the windows. This is so fatiguing and petty, and I mean that purely narratively, because I'm sorry, we just had this scene. We just saw the luncheonette get vandalized. What do you mean 2 scenes later it's vandalized again and we're supposed to care exactly the same amount?
Yeah, and that scene happened like right after the scene where he was called a turf and a racist. So like basically we just had one scene and then had another scene and then had a scene that combined those two.
Right. And then, speaking of redundancies, this time there's a crowd of protesters out front, and the cops have to take him to safety again. Like Jay mentioned, the crime rates have just shot up, and there's been a string of robberies, but all the liberal stores, like the boutiques and the cyber cafes, they're all fine.
So the boutique soap store is squeaky clean.
That's good. They might have said something like that too. This chapter ends on an exchange that feels like procedurally generated. I can't parse like what this is supposed to mean, but again, I might could be wrong. Let me just read it real quick. Gus took a deep breath and thought about his meeting with Wally earlier. Then he said, "It's clear to see the buck stops with me. I think we've all had enough of this. Give me until the end of the day. I'll find a way to make it right." James whispered out of the side of her mouth. Kind of a bold statement, don't you think? Gus followed her to her office. Not if I can help it. So, kind of a bold statement, answer, not if I can help it. What does that mean? Like, that won't be a bold statement if I can help it? Those 3 lines of dialogue felt like they came from 3 different shitty action movies.
I think that's exactly what happened. It's like you said, it feels procedurally generated because it's like you're just sort of infinitely recombining these tropes.
Right.
And sometimes they recombine in a way that doesn't quite sound human. I don't know.
That was like the only part that like felt not human to me. Gus goes to meet with Wally Sturgis, the incumbent mayor, to discuss plans to like take back control of the city. At this point, Gus nobly and selflessly decides that he wants to step down before any more of his town could be destroyed. But no, they need him more than ever. We fade to black right as Sturgis and Gus are working on their plan, creating this dramatic irony that's going to make you think this is going to be a genius or at least elaborate idea that they come up with.
Or even interesting to read about.
Builds up a lot of false hope. So the constant attention on Gus's house by the media and liberal protesters means that his house needs 24/7 surveillance. He forces Randy and Ashley to do this, as if they don't have enough going on in their lives.
What do you mean? Gus has suffered more than anybody. I mean, his luncheonette, Andrew, it was vandalized. Hey, not once. Twice.
His luncheonette! Literally within 24 hours. So it might as well just be one vandalism. I don't know what the statute of limitation is for a discrete act of vandalism, but to me, that's just one act. So we learned that Emma was suspended from her job. She teaches at a quote-unquote grammar school. More on that word choice later. Get this. Emma assigns her children to read Harry Potter, which First of all, who has ever done that in like a scholastic elementary school setting? Like the lesson plan is we're going to watch the movie and compare and contrast and see which one was harder to make. And she gets complaints that she was, and I quote, assigning a book promoting witchcraft written by a woman who bashes trans ideals, which are diametrically opposed reasons to hate Harry Potter.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
I'm sure there is someone out there who does exist, but it's still so messy to me to include both.
Yeah, like you would think that the liberal parents would be totally down with neo-paganism.
Right.
I mean, they're doing the weed out there, so like that might as well be the next step.
I have a non-binary friend tattooed up to here, gets scandalized when people wear shorts in church. So, like, you know, belief systems can evolve in weird ways, but, like, this is just so ridiculous. Side note, Gus said that he liked H.P. Lovecraft growing up, which, no, he did not.
No,
there's no way on God's green earth, there's no way on Cthulhu's green earth that he liked H.P. Lovecraft, because I'm pretty sure H.P. Lovecraft only came back to the cultural conversation like relatively recently, and a guy who doesn't digitize his Polaroids probably wouldn't be reading this stuff.
Yeah, Gus would have to be getting on to 70 if he was reading H.P. Lovecraft when he was young.
Gus and Banks finally enact that genius plan that Gus and Wally were working on earlier. They sneak out into the night, and the plan is as follows. 1, go into shady alleyways and bait thieves. 2, brutally assault them. 3, make them swear to move away with all of their friends. Just genius. Genius idea. Never could have thought of that one. So let's walk through this. Let's walk through this. If you are at the point of poverty where you resort to petty crime in shady alleyways, I don't think any threat in the world could get you to move just because of the economic reality of what that means.
Well, Andrew, they're funded by urban elites.
Are they?
They are when it's convenient for the narrative.
Right. Can they just call up the benefactor and be like, hey, my arms are broken by this insane man. Can I go home now? And will they say yes? Like, I don't understand, but it works. So what do I know? What do I know about reality? The next day, the protests downtown are getting even worse, as is the media, because now we have CNN and MSNBC vans around, as opposed to the rinky-dink normal news vans around. Gus gives an address to the crowd, which is such an insane move to play after you decide that wanton violence was going to be your solution.
Right.
But people listen to him, so again, what do I know? He gets in front of him, and he says, my fellow Americans, I simply cannot be racist because I have a black friend. And he again points to Banks, who sheepishly waves. The crowd doesn't react very well to this. Again, don't know why they would. They call Banks a token, which is the second jump scare that I've ever received from a book. And Stranger shows up to remind the crowd that the townies call them locusts, which is another kind of broken clock moment where I think this is actually a good thing to call out. Locust is very dehumanizing language, and even when they're not calling them locusts, they call them insects or rodents. And if I were a well-intentioned left-leaning person who moved to Springerville for a better life, I might feel a little bit alienated and inclined to vote for Stranger. So this is a good political move on his part.
Mm-hmm.
So this riles up the crowd, and Stranger kind of stands in front of them, and he points to Gus. He's like, step down. This is my town now. We learned that the drug epidemic that Jay alluded to is getting worse, almost certainly the work of Sniper and his gang, and Gus decides to hold a secret rally at the Amboy Sugar House. I don't know what a sugar house is.
It sounded like it was some kind of like old processing facility, like not like a factory, but like a place where people refined sugar by hand or something.
Like a refinery?
Refinery, that's a good word for that.
So Gus is like, we need to take our town back and fight people. And if you can't fight people, get security cameras.
Yeah. And all the old ladies are like, I don't want a security camera in my home. What if I'm being watched by Big Brother?
Right, and not to really get into it, but closed circuit televisions exist.
Exists.
You can have a security system that's not connected to the internet.
Yeah, you don't have to get like a ring or whatever.
And again, I don't know if we're supposed to think about the aesthetics of holding a rally inviting you to take up arms and take back your town from the capital O outsiders, but I definitely had certain associative images in my mind.
Certain associative images that I believe they lampshade by saying that they don't want to get caught because people will say all they're missing is the hoods.
Yes. So if
Which, yeah, they probably would think that, because that would be a pretty rational thing to think given the circumstances.
if you're that worried about the association, maybe you should rethink why you're there in the first place. I digress. But suddenly the rally is compromised. The media is coming. And in the fray, trying to escape in this chaotic scene, they happen upon Stranger's Aid, that shrimpy guy Roger. Gus brutally assaults him. Literally just runs up to him, punches him in the gut, and knocks him out. He puts a note with directions to the interstate in his pocket with some money. And Gus says, again, it had to be done.
Had to be done.
Which it did not. It did not have to be done. I realize it's dramatic irony and Gus does not know this, but Roger could have been like a good ally in this time. But the first instinct that Gus has is to beat the shit out of this man.
He does kind of go John Wick on him, so maybe those earlier fears weren't so unfounded after all.
Yeah, I mean, right? So news breaks out of the secret rally, and this worsens the protests, which of course it does. Emma and Gus are attacked on the way to the diner, and they get routed back. Stranger also is kind of noticing that things are getting out of hand, and he obliquely compares it to, I think, Sherman's March. Quote, the very bad times in the South, oh so long or not so long ago. I can't think of anything specific other than that invokes Northerners wreaking havoc upon the South.
That's a verbal tarot card. You could project anything you wanted onto that.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
think that's why it's so vague, so that if you don't get it, you can be like, oh yeah, it's definitely the thing that I'm thinking of right now.
Right, but his benefactors are indifferent to this, as will be revealed in a dramatic reading. Sniper also begins to question Stranger's authority, and backed into a corner, Stranger's like, I want to take control. I'm not the puppet, I'm a partner. Back on Gus. Through a coordinated effort, Gus captures some of the people that were following him in his car. This is the first big firefight in the novel, and I'm really surprised at the lack of weight it's given. Earlier, it's all been fist fights, but like bullets fly and like people get shot at and shot to, and like we don't really care. And that's a weird thing to say about something like that. But
yeah, I have a hard time buying that the media would have been out in Springerville before this point. But like at this point, if a mayoral election in like a small southern town really escalated into like essentially gang warfare or like factional violence, they would definitely be there. They would have good reason to be there and like want to report on the situation.
It's kind of escalated at this point, but again, their strategy is just to beat them within an inch of their lives, cause legitimate medical harm to these poor people who probably can't afford the treatment, and tell them to move away, which they agree to do, which I guess if you had me within an inch of my life, I would agree to move away too, but I just don't know. So there's even more rioting back downtown, and Gus alters his genius strategy from before. Now he not only brutally assaults people at random, he also takes their phones and destroys them so they can't record it. Not to sound like an entitled millennial liberal crybaby soy boy, but without a phone and with 2 broken arms, I'm not sure how easily I could move either. So like, don't know what they want from these people. They then killdozer the entire freaking trailer park where all the liberal ruffians live. Like they take a bulldozer and go trailer by trailer. They make sure that every single one is abandoned, which they somehow are all abandoned. I guess killdozer is based, but it just freaked me out.
This is another moment where they just like wreck a local person's livelihood
Yes!
because the trailer park is owned by a townie
Yes!
who has spoken in the novel. Like he has a face and a voice.
He's kind of dopey, but like he's a local. People like him. He's a friend. For some reason, they specifically break into Sniper's trailer, I think because they fear it might be booby trapped.
Yeah, Gus is like, I've seen this stuff in the war where like an abandoned house will be booby trapped and ready to like blow your legs off.
Which I guess it makes sense, but if you weren't worried about that for any of the other trailers, why do you start now? They find a bunch of quote unquote drug paraphernalia inside and then blow that one up specifically. Like just light it on fire and call it a day. But it's okay because Gus lets Shane, the groundskeeper that we were talking about, he lets him stay at his house until he can find a new place. So after that triumphant scene, we're back on Stranger, who somehow doesn't seem as villainous as he did the scene before. Roger has disappeared. I guess he took up the offer to leave town. Sniper is completely out of control. Stranger briefly considers warning Gus that Sniper is out to get him, but ultimately he's like, no, I'm still a bad guy, and that's what bad guys do.
We're bad guys.
Stranger goes downtown, and it turns out none of the protesters know who he even is, despite being ostensibly protesting for him losing the election. I thought this moment was kind of funny. It works in the framework that the book kind of wants you to, where these guys are just here to cause trouble.
It's kind of interesting. It like suggests that, like, to me at least, it suggests that Stranger's benefactors have people on their payroll, and those people know how to get like a protest group together and ship them out to communities where the benefactors need trouble stirred up. But then the protesters themselves are gullible enough that they don't realize that what they're protesting is fake, and also like that somebody is really funding it.
Or not given a cover story.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is why I don't like man on the street things in general, regardless of where it is on the political spectrum, because of the risk of cherry picking. It's like a liberal college protesters owned, and you just show the people that don't know why they're there, even though like these might be 1 out of 100 people who actually like are educated about the problems that they're talking about.
Right.
We're going back to Gus. Shane is like a good roommate. He volunteers to paint over some of the vandalism on Gus's house, which has apparently been happening. Emma is officially fired from her job, and there's news of a hurricane that's sure to draw media attention away from Springerville. Okay,
Sure.
I'm not gonna get into that. Yeah, sure.
Too exhausted to care about how lazy that is.
Yeah, apparently it's not gonna like be a threat to Springerville, which like 40 minutes away from Charleston would absolutely like be affected, but whatever. Gus goes to meet up with his fellow townies at the ironworks to form a plan, but there's an explosion, and now the luncheonette is officially blown up. So it was broken into and vandalized. The plywood was painted over, and now they just bomb it. I don't know why they just didn't bomb it in the first place, but I guess since they tore down the trailer park, now Sniper and his gang are out to get them. A few protesters are actually caught in the crossfire and die because of this, but there's still hope because somehow a piece of Gus's American flag survived the explosion, lying bright and pristine upon the ashes, and Jay is saluting the screening.
I'm not saluting the screen, Andrew. I'm saluting the American flag and the flag of the state of South Carolina that I have posted up on the wall opposite me. You just can't see them because they're off camera.
Which is just so saccharine. This was apparently like a phenomenon in like post 9/11 movies. The Spider-Man movie is a good example of this, the Raimi one, where like Spider-Man will dramatically pose in front of a billowing American flag. I think the United States had about like 1 year they could do like after September 2001 where that was acceptable, but this is just saccharine.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. I cannot believe they did that to me. It would be more based if it were a South Carolina flag.
Right.
But no, it's gotta be the stars and stripes.
For all the lip service they give to like the idea of America, it seems like the thing they really care about is Springerville, South Carolina. So like something more local would have made more sense even like in character.
Right, and I might have even excused it, but no. No, not here. Not now. So they go back to Gus's house to find that the door is open. There's no one inside, but Shane's been murdered. This is surely the work of Sniper and his biker gang, so the townies all form this hunting party. Apparently, a few of the liberal store owners join up, which is actually kind of nice to see. This was something that I specifically missed in Trigger Warning, where none of the liberals ever came around to Jake's way of life. But here we have this one scene, it never comes back, but at least we know that there are like store owners who are in on this fight for the town.
They have a stake in it.
Yeah, that's nice. They go to Stranger's house and find it looted and vandalized. And Stranger's there just like drinking himself to death. He's like, I'm still a bad guy, Gus, but I'll be your ally because I don't like Sniper either. This is just too much for me. But ultimately, he can't be much help because someone opens fire on his house, gunning down Stranger and hitting Emma. Gus runs down the shooter. There's a couple of bikers who like hold him at gunpoint. They're like, you should have stayed in your luncheonette, Southern boy, or what. Well, I guess they wouldn't say it with a Southern accent because they're supposed to be like from New Jersey or something. Yeah, you should have stayed in your luncheonette, boy. Wait, no, that's worse.
That's still turned Southern at the end.
At the last second, Ashley and Randy gun down the bikers, saving Gus. The narrative evilly and callously calls this all the therapy they would need to move on with their lives. Which, no, bad.
Well, it's like they say, there's no therapy like retributive therapy.
Right, there's no therapy like opening fire to a bunch of random bikers. Ashley and Randy tell Gus that Emma is getting medical attention, but Stranger didn't make it, ultimately wasting this character. Whatever, don't care. Now Sniper is our main antagonist. We then learn that the protesters have returned somehow.
Like Palpatine.
Right, somehow like Palpatine. Literally, we thought they went away with the hurricane, but no. This time, the people of Springerville outnumber them, and a brawl breaks out where all the townies take everyone's cell phones and force them to leave Springerville by whatever means they'd arrived.
This moment defies all sense. Like, it feels so unprecedented. Like, the logistics of it are so, like, otherworldly. Literally, they have this battle of 5 armies clash, except it's 2 armies and they just are running at each other. And then the townies take all of the protesters' phones, and then they make them get into lines based on what kind of transportation they arrived on, be it bus, car, plane, or train. They arrange like a carpooling service,
yes,
so that they can get the people to like the bus stop and the train station and the airport to get them gone. They just arrange this like right there on the spot.
Right, because somehow they still have places to return to. They can go anywhere without their phones. Again, not to sound like a millennial, but it's not like there's payphones around to call family or whatever. Like, they're screwed.
What are they gonna do when they get to the regional ass airport that doesn't just have, empty seats on flights?
I guess they're gonna protest at the airport.
Protest at the airport.
I don't know.
Demand a non-binary airplane.
So Gus and the cops track Sniper and his gang back down to an abandoned house, and then recklessly and indiscriminately open fire on them. They leap out of the bushes, guns ablaze, and just shoot at the bikers. Need I remind you that the cops are involved with this? I don't mean to sound pro-cop, but I feel like indiscriminately gunning into a house is not something you would immediately do with no other alternative.
I mean, this isn't The Last of Us. Like,
right.
There's procedure of a sort.
Right. We later learned that Dawn, comes up with cover stories for everyone so they don't get into as much legal trouble as they could have, which, wow, the implications there. But anyways, the bikers scramble, as one would do when you are shot at, and the chase leads... I don't want to get into the scene. The chase leads right to the grammar school, where despite the semester being over for the holidays, there are still after-school programs for the special needs kids because they need the support,
they need the
structure and support.
It can't be exaggerated, like how insulting and ridiculous this scene is.
Yeah.
The way that they're headed towards the school. Oh, wait, it's okay, actually, because the school's empty. Oh, no, wait, it's full of a bunch of disabled children, inexplicably. And they're gonna shoot them.
It's like a bad South Park episode. It feels like...
It has the comedic timing of a South Park episode, on God.
Yeah, So the next scene is really chaotic, like we're alluding to. It incorporates a lot of characters who aren't mentioned a lot, so it's all really just a blur to me. But suffice it to say, the bikers enter the school on their motorbikes. They tear down the halls and up the stairs, shotguns ablaze. Sniper holds the special needs kids hostage while his cronies drive around terrorizing them. The narration describes them yowling in fear and pain. The teacher's also there. Our heroes pursue them inside, and Gus is shot in an altercation with one of these bike-mounted gang members. Just when it seems like all is lost, all the townies come in and swarm them, and I quote, like a zombie movie, only in this case, the zombies were the good guys and very much alive. So I guess, like...
So not like a zombie movie.
Or like Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island, I guess, where the zombies are secretly the good guys.
Oh, right, that's true.
So
that's a good poll.
I don't know if they were making that reference specifically, but that's what came to mind to me. So Sniper and Gus get into a standoff. Chief Don James gets a drop on him somehow right as Gus succumbs to his wound. So now all of Springerville is united. Gus recovers and is sworn in as mayor from the hospital bed as the uncontested mayor, and they raise a monument to all the people killed in the conflict of the past few days. Gus wants us to know that he specifically fought for some of the protesters' names to be included, the ones that died in the explosion, so that we remember that he's a noble and selfless man. The city is almost in ruins, but together they can build back better. The end.
Or if you prefer, they can make Springerville great again.
Right. Whichever side you want to be on. There are some good townies now who are like integrating to the culture of the town.
The great American melting pot.
Right. Springerville, South Carolina. Wow.
My God.
When Stranger knew he was alone, he made a call. Have you seen the news?
You keep forgetting. We are the news. Looks to me like things are progressing nicely.
Stranger paced around his kitchen. It looks like a goddamn siege. Last I saw, they were starting fires and playing with it. There was a slight chuckle on the other end.
That is what they tend to do. Is there a reason for this call?
Yes. How many more did you send overnight? I appreciate the help, but it's at the point where it's getting out of hand.
Are you questioning me?
Stranger gripped his kitchen counter, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. No, I'm not questioning you. I would have appreciated a little heads up. I'm just concerned. Protesting is one thing. This looks like a prison riot. If this keeps going the way it is, there won't be a town left to run. Oh my God, that's a huge monologue. I didn't realize that.
I can soliloquize if you require.
Okay, soliloquize at me.
If you so require. Okay.
All right, go for it.
Do you want a town of slack-jawed yokels or something entirely new and improved? You're to stay in your house and say nothing for 2 more days. Let them do what they need to do. When the dust clears, most of the locals who oppose you will be making plans to leave. We're not just replacing the mayor. If that was the ultimate goal, we could have made that happen quite easily. Brayden, you need to step back and see the bigger picture. We're going to redesign Springerville, and it will be the roadmap for transforming not just the state, but everywhere in the country that needs an assist into the 21st century. It's in your best interest now to hang up, rethink questioning us again, and figure out your place in all of this. You're not invaluable. It's wise to remember that.
Ooh, chilling.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
I feel like half the sentences in the book could be punctuated with that.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, that summary was a great appetizer to the southern meal of our podcast. That was like a... Ooh, what's a southern food? A biscuit, maybe.
Biscuit.
Now I'm ready for something hearty, like a ham. Something sweet. Something we liked about this book.
I thought you were going for like a country ham biscuit. We're going to put some meat on this flaky bones of our summary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the flaky, pale bones of our summary need something hearty and sweet. Maybe some honey.
Honey baked ham. Well, J.A., as you said on the back of your book, we've lived free and we've read hard. So now we're going to talk about some of the things that we liked about Not My Home. Well, let's start there, actually. The title is perfect. Depending on where you read it in the story, it takes on different meanings. You know, it could be like a defeatist, this is not my home anymore. Or it could be like this call to arms, not in my home, you won't protest.
Mm-hmm. And lest we forget, a stranger is also a point of view character, and it is literally not his home. Mm-hmm. So spoken from his point of view, it's just true, which is another angle on the title that I liked a lot.
I mentioned this already, but I do like that the liberal store owners joined in on the fight. There was a lot more lip service given to the possibility of converting people to your way of life, which I think is kind of a goal here with this politically bent thriller where there's ostensibly going to be some teaching and showing this new way of life. It's a good way to show that, you know, they can integrate some people. It's just the ones that were causing trouble and protesting, presumably about bathrooms. But I digress.
They were some of the good ones.
Right.
The ones that joined in, you could say.
For sure.
Speaking of bathrooms, I actually thought, and this is not a backhanded compliment at all, I actually really thought that all of the evil non-binary characters were really funny. I extracted genuine joy from every moment where a non-binary character entered the scene purely so that they could proclaim their gender identity and make it everyone else's problem. That gave me a good chuckle. It doesn't serve the narrative in any meaningful way, but, you know, I smiled.
It takes performing gender to a whole new level.
You tell me.
Yeah, there were a couple moments, few and far between, but present, where the narrative was very funny. The no one knowing why they were protesting was one. There are a couple, like, little just human funny banter between the characters, especially like Gus and Emma or Gus and Banks when they're not being problematic between Gus and Banks. That friendship is pretty fun. Feels lived in like a Cracker Barrel where everything's like artfully placed and trying to sell you something, but like charming.
Liminal. Now I'm just thinking about Cracker Barrel. I don't know if this is a positive or not, but it's definitely not a critique. I was curious if you noticed the conspicuous lack of like church going and religious imagery and just religion generally. Like, it has such a small presence in this book where you would think it would be right at home.
I didn't even think about that. No. That's weird.
It is weird, right? Like, they mention church like once or twice, or God, but none of the main characters go to church. They don't seem to draw their morals from like a religious center, and it felt like conspicuously absent. Like a town like this, certainly a lot of the stuff that's happening politically would be centered around the church. Gus's luncheonette at times almost kind of replaces like a church basement or something, you know, as like a meeting place.
It's definitely a communion, a site of sharing and breaking of bread. Read biscuits. I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if that's kind of bleeding over from the Western genre where you don't really think too much about church going. It's more like gallivanting through the wilderness with your cows. I don't know. Or maybe it was just to like make it more palatable, but then again, this would be most palatable to someone who was church going.
Yeah.
That's perplexing.
And like the fact that I noticed that it wasn't there doesn't suggest that I think it should be. So that's why this isn't really a critique. Like, I think the novel works fine without it. But once you notice it, it's hard to kind of ignore.
Yeah, if I ever reread this book, which I won't, I think it's going to be a lot more of a liminal experience because everything's there except for that, basically. I'm going to be dwelling on this.
Part of me was like, well, is it to avoid alienating people who are like very conservative, but not church going. And then I was thinking, well, no, because a lot of people who are very conservative and actively church going feel alienated when religion is absent. And that's a huge part of like this novel's intended reader base.
Presumably, yeah.
It feels like a very strange and intentional choice, and I just can't quite track what the intent was.
Now you got me like rethinking this entire book, because there are definitely some moments, not for this section, but there are definitely some moments where there's a lot of conflicting things here that make me question the genuineness or veracity of this book. And I think this is just kind of a keystone in that whole equation. The action is well choreographed, even if it's brutal. It makes sense to me. I'm someone who likes to skim through action scenes, and I generally didn't hear. I remember saying something similar about trigger warning, so I think this is just like a strength that you have, J.A., as a writer.
One thing I thought was interesting was how hierarchical the villains are. Because like if the villains are going to be hierarchical, it kind of in a way implies that like these strict hierarchies are something that are like not conducive to like human prosperity, which like I sort of agree with on some level. But like the fact that the villains have this very rigid structure where the people at the top like are beyond question. They're almost like deified in that way.
Yeah.
And that's made out to be kind of hubris or like a flaw in their way of organizing themselves. I was like, yeah, I agree. That is sort of up and weird that they treat Stranger that way despite him being their ally, or that he treats the crowd, you know, with such disdain. He's always so smug around both Sniper and the regular protesters, who in turn like turn on him for trying to assert himself. So I was like, yeah, this novel in a way is sort of condemning such rigid power structures.
That's kind of what's insidious, not only about this book, but other pieces of rhetoric, I guess, adjacent to the bent that this book is presenting. The idea that there are people in power and those people want to stay in power is just a fact.
Yeah.
Is just a fact of life, no matter where you come from. And exploring that through this lens is interesting, or at least thought-provoking. Again, I don't like the implications that it has with certain groups of people specifically.
Right, of course. Are there even some wealthy people that throw money around but don't make themselves publicly known, who have undue influence in certain decisions being made in certain rooms in the country? Like probably, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Again, their sort of a positionality notwithstanding, like the fact that the novel is aware of that shows some level of critical thought, at least. I really don't want to overstate like the things that this novel does well, because they're not that many. And like you said, there's like so many insidious aspects to it. Like virtually any good thing you say about this could be followed up with a huge asterisk. But you know, in the interest of giving it some praise.
Right. J.A. Johnstone, you've been a member of this club for years now, and I'm sure you really want our critique, so we do have an obligation to tell you these things, but it's up to you to not weaponize these good things that we're telling you about.
Yeah, at the very least, what we can do now is identify some strengths that you could not choose to like activate the weaknesses of, because a lot of the things I think we're referencing as weaknesses of the strengths are things you could just choose not to include.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way we can save this.
I don't think so either.
So I think the things that you do well, I think you could combine with authors such as Lauren M. Davis. The paranoia from these hierarchies is something that Lauren kind of did by accident. And I think if you two put your minds together and had that paranoia and that like very real hierarchy being invoked, something could come out of that.
Man, a collab between these two powerhouses. I'd pay for that.
I would give so much money. Lauren, our dear friend and student, if you're listening to this, please, we'll get you in touch with J.A. Johnstone. We'll make it happen.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
We'll broker this alliance.
I think a lot of the things that this book does well are kind of almost invisible. Like you referenced that you liked one of the fight scenes a minute ago, and like I didn't even really notice them because fight scenes aren't something that typically stand out to me. But if it's something that you enjoy, I think you'll definitely get that out of this book. You also mentioned that there was that moment where the dialogue felt weird, but in like every other instance that I can think of, even when the dialogue is familiar or even cliche, borrowing from every single action movie that there's ever been, it is at least kind of cozy in a way. Like you don't even really think about it. And if you're just looking for entertainment, this novel is a breezy read that can help you not think about like your actual physical surroundings and instead focus on something else.
That's all I got. That's all I got. Sorry, J.A. Gus grabbed the man by the collar and lifted him to his feet. I'm gonna give you two choices. You can continue to piss us off and we'll hold you down until the cops get here, or you can run back to whatever hole you're living in and tell everyone we're not sitting idly by anymore. You want to wreck our town? You're gonna have to get through us, and I mean all of us.
We need to read a good one next.
I know, we really do. Is it just me, or are our good sections getting shorter and shorter the more episodes we do?
I'm so scared that you named that because it's been in the back of my mind as well, and I was just kind of trying not to think about it. Hoping that maybe they would die quietly, like one day neither of us would bring it up and then we would just never do it again.
No, that's not the mission of SBU English Club.
We have to stick to it.
We have to try to save these books. But to save them, we must first name the things that fell short of the vision.
Don't use SA as a plot device, and especially don't do that as the opening like thriller scene of your novel telling us that this is a really exciting book that we're about to read, because it's like very cheapening and disgusting and shocking beyond what that kind of scene is for. That said, if we are going to open with that scene, and we should not, but if we are going to open with that scene, we really, I think, could have used more of Ashley's perspective.
Yes.
Whenever Randall and Ashley are invoked, it's usually as a pair. Mm-hmm. And when it's not, it's just Randall. So like Randall is the one in the relationship who actually does things as a single entity. Whenever Ashley is an individual in the narrative, she exists only to like suffer. Mm-hmm. She is struggling with what she has endured, but then as soon as she recovers, she's like kind of subsumed back into him and like then follows him around and shoots who he shoots, punches who he punches.
Which is therapeutic for them.
Giving her much more of a voice if she's going to be the character that we open on and this is what's going to happen to her in the opening, and letting her have a proper arc, I think is absolutely imperative.
I think the voice is the operative difference here. I'm a little bit ambivalent on prescribing something that you can or cannot write about. People who've seen the Barbie video will know that one of my favorite bands is Lingua Ignota. There's that movie Maleficent that people say is good. I've never seen it, so sorry if this isn't a good touch point, but like stories and works of art that come from that place deserve to exist.
Yeah.
But the difference between those two examples and this book is the perspective. Ashley is barely a character, and the narrative doesn't even try to treat it with the gravity that it deserves. Mm-hmm. There's 2 points where J.A. absolutely drops the ball here. Less directly, but I still couldn't help but notice that we spend a lot of time mourning the freaking luncheonette.
Yeah.
More than we ever hear or spend thinking about Randy and Ashley. And secondly, Ashley and Randy find their attackers by accident, get a sort of country justice catharsis, and are immediately overshadowed by Gus's winning the stupid election. Mm-hmm. Like, it is the same scene, it's the same page. We don't spend 1 second thinking about the implications this has on Ashley, on Randy, on them as a couple. No, it's Gus is the mayor now. That one is unforgivable to me. Glossing over this being bad writing, and if this weren't about SA, this could have been some other harrowing act, you would not want to put the catharsis for two unrelated conflicts right next to each other. But with the specificity here, this is downright cruel.
I think it's also really interesting that the character that gets the most catharsis in that scene isn't even Ashley, it's Randall. He gets to like win ultimately this conflict that's happening by getting revenge for her. Like what she wants isn't a factor even.
Right.
Which is such a bizarre and cruel omission.
It's almost intentionally mishandled with how wanton it is. And a practiced writer to the caliber of J.A. Johnstone should know what she's doing here. Kind of moving away from this specific example, we've said it a million times, this book is mean. The assault on the liberals are way too brutal. There's not one fight that doesn't end with someone's knees being kicked in or elbows being broken. What got me beyond the fighting is that there's so much shit, like literal feces being smeared as vandalism or littering the street. And that's kind of funny, but like it's so gross. And I have no idea why it was necessary. Trigger warning had nothing like this. And I think the shit is just kind of a symbol for how gross and weird that this book is in its conception.
It's as Dennis Prager would say, scatological. Obsessed with urine and feces.
Prager say that?
Yeah.
Oh my
There's
God.
a soundbite of him saying that.
That's awful. In addition to being too mean, it's also too sexy. And that's a weird thing to say for a book that isn't that sexy, but like, it's just disturbing because it goes against other works that are in this group. Ben Shapiro didn't have a lot of stuff like this. Trigger warning, again, was nothing like this.
Are you kidding me? Hearing in Ben Shapiro's True Allegiance, hearing whatever those characters' names were say, "Take a bullet for you, babe." I mean, you know, I swooned every time.
I guess the bullet is phallic in this situation, but like, I don't know. Emma gets naked a lot. And again, Randy and Ashley were going to have sex. They were naked in preparation to have sex in chapter 0. It's unsettling.
There was a sex scene, I think, in the second half between Gus and Emma that Andrew was conspicuously absent from your summary. You prude.
Well, because it said Emma didn't have a lick of clothes on her, and then the scene shifted. What was I supposed to say?
Good. That's so
Okay, good. Yeah, Emma was naked. They had sex, presumably, but we don't know because it faded to black. But like, again, she was naked. Like, Natalie never got naked. What's her name? Brett Hawthorne's wife from True Allegiance never got naked. It's not a problem, but it's just weird considering the bent here. And the fact that it's so sexy and it's so mean, and the fact that it's so conspicuously absent of religion pairs in this really weird way.
Maybe the Johnstones are onto some trend within their own demographic, their reader demographic, that we're not privy to.
What demographic demands assault in the first chapter and shit being smeared everywhere and liberals being broken apart by this freaking insane man? No one wants this.
I mean, if we assume it's genuine, it presupposes that somebody does want it.
Well, the problem is that we presume it's genuine, but I digress.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, I don't know. If this is going to appeal to anybody, it's got to appeal to somebody that, like, wants to hurt other people, like, believes that the time for talk has long passed, and that the only path forward is to destroy the capital O other.
Yeah.
I don't know how else you interpret, like, the aggregate of all this violence.
And that's kind of ironic because that presupposes that someone is out there trying to orchestrate people getting violent against each other. Like, this book glows harder than Ben Shapiro's book did, which I never thought I would say.
It does glow pretty hard.
It feels so not genuine, and where this manifests most, other than the vague unreality of the entire book, is this consistent issue with word choice. This might be completely my own lived experience and be completely inaccurate. I don't know. Block is used as a unit of measurement. Like, the explosion was 2 blocks away. And even in grid-shaped small towns, especially in the South, this might be different elsewhere, I've never heard block. They would say Main Street, Cypress Road, by Old Man Jenkins' house.
Yeah.
They would never say blocks. Luncheonette, we've made references to. I guess there's nothing wrong with this term, but I've never heard it, and it feels like kind of a frou-frou French word that Gus wouldn't want to say either, so I don't know.
Yeah, I could more easily imagine a bunch of, like, townies saying, like, down at the luncheon than the luncheonette.
Right, it sounds like gastropub. Like no one says that. You would say diner, you would say deli, you would say restaurant. You would never say luncheonette with ETTEs.
You would say Gus's place.
Gus's place. Yeah, have you noticed that there's no name for this place? It's just the luncheonette. There's no, like...
Oh, that's weird.
Gus's Greasy Spoon. It is lowercase the lowercase luncheonette.
Wow. This is a really liminal book. Everything is transient and placeless. Oh, there's a hurricane coming, but now it's a tropical storm, but now it's not actually a problem. Like,
Right.
There's a bunch of protesters, but now there aren't protesters, but now there are protesters again, and we're going to organize to ship them out of town with a ride-sharing service that we made ad hoc. There's an old sugar refinery that no one goes to anymore.
Right, that we use for fascist rants against immigrants. There's a lot of twee Southernisms here and there in the dialogue and narration. Someone's screaming their fool head off. Emma doesn't have a stitch of clothing on her. It's not a lot. In fact, it's not a lot. It's kind of piecemeal, which makes me think that J.A. Johnstone possibly doesn't know much about the dialect and maybe doesn't even have an idea of anything in the South at all.
Maybe even perhaps Googled a few Southernisms.
Right.
And Googled the name of a town 40 miles outside of Charleston.
Right.
And then kind of palette swapped bits of it.
Yeah, her bio on the back of the book says she lives on a ranch in Tennessee. If that were the only place below the Mason-Dixon line that she has ever set foot in, I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised because of just how completely unreal everything feels.
Mm-hmm.
This happened with Trigger Warning too, and I remember either playing into it or not arguing as hard for it, and I feel the same way about Wild Animus, but I don't want to relitigate that because that's a little bit fresher. This book feels like an argument ad absurdum against itself. It is about strawman liberals told through a strawman conservative lens in a straw story. So none of it can be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good way of putting it. I would not have been able to put it in those words, but that is exactly the feeling that I got too. Because there are times where the conservatism comes through so intensely that it feels like self-parody.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case, then the parody of liberals stops making sense because those are ideologically at odds.
Mm-hmm.
And so it starts to feel like the book doesn't believe in anything at all, and it just exists to be mean-spirited towards whatever group it's talking about at any particular moment.
Right, and I find that genuinely harmful. I don't talk about this a lot in real life or on the podcast, but I'm pretty gung-ho about being Southern. We're like 4 or 5 really important conversations away from this remotely being important, but a lot of the problems that J.A. Johnstone is exploring here are real. Not in such an obvious way or even like a nefarious way, but people coming into small towns with a lot of money, buying things out and pricing out the locals absolutely does happen. And it absolutely is harmful for the people that live there. This is a real thing that happens. It happens to my hometown. What doesn't happen is all of the drug dealers and criminals come along with them. It doesn't work the way that she's showing it. And by showing it in such an absurd way, I'm worried that she's completely invalidating this entire conversation about how our interconnected world is creating a lot of inequality.
It's like a little bit like the way that pseudoscientific treatments and medicines, sometimes they don't do any actual harm, but by taking them and by spending money on them, a person who might be like seriously ill is not getting actual treatment and is spending money that could be spent on actual treatment on something that's doing nothing, and so they're wasting valuable time that they could be using getting better.
Right.
This is sort of doing that, but for like important political discourses, where like instead of talking about what's actually occurring, we instead, if we allow ourselves to be distracted by this book, talk about these fake issues that aren't real. And so like once we've disproven them, that's all well and good, but then we've wasted time on that when we could have actually been working towards solving something as opposed to just knocking down ideas that are totally fallacious or illogical.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier, those man on the street things that PragerU or Ben Shapiro will do, where they will cherry pick interviews with like stupid liberals and say, look, all liberals are this stupid. This is cherry picking the most absurd, weird arguments for this issue and being, look, all of this is stupid. Don't think about it at all. And I just have to ask why? Why are you so angry about this, JA? And why are you doing it under the name of your deceased uncle? It's all so bizarre to me.
Why are you attributing these weird views to him?
Because not only is it harmful to this vague ideal of Southern integrity or whatever, it's also harmful to William Johnstone. I don't think we did a good enough job establishing it here or in Trigger Warning. William Johnstone is not nobody. He has a legacy. He has an enormous fan base of people that ostensibly care about him and what he has to say. What about this do you feel entitled to ruining?
Yeah, I don't know.
For nothing.
Maybe it was in his will that like once a year one of these books has to come out, one of these more ripped from the headlines style thrillers, and they're just allowed to be whatever, but they have to come out. Who knows?
I was scouring like the William Johnstone Facebook fan group, and they mentioned that the thrillers were like a yearly tradition, and I don't know if that predates William Johnstone's death, but I got to do some more investigation.
I want to back up just a little bit here because I feel like something that I haven't exactly stated but have kind of hinted at is I came away from this book not knowing what it wants me to actually think. Like, I don't think I have a good sense of what this book actually believes and would like for me to believe about the world. And I'm curious if you also left it feeling that way, or if like there was some kind of coherent message that you received from it.
I've thought about this. The answer is no. I don't have any better of an idea than you do. And I will not accept any argument that does not allow for J.A. Johnstone hates either her uncle personally or the fan base stereotype that it represents, and just wanted to be mean in a book. I cannot accept any argument that doesn't allow for that.
I mean, could it just be some kind of bait? Like,
yeah, to get people on podcasts.
Maybe they're just trying to get everybody angry and like they just want people to create content about their books, and we're doing that.
I guess, but like, on one hand, I think that's absolutely the case. I said this in the Empress Teresa iceberg video. The internet has come to the point where if anything like makes you mad, there is a well above zero chance that the person writing it doesn't actually believe it and just wants to get a rise out of you. Attention is like the new commodity of the modern age, or whatever people say now.
Content is king.
Content is king. I guess to an extent, maybe this helps keep the income stream coming with attention, but like the Amazon and Goodreads page for this book is a desert. Nobody is talking about this.
Yeah.
Nowhere near the extent to they're talking about Trigger Warning or even the other Westerns that are coming out under JA's name. So it's either not working or there's yet another explanation. And I kind of want to side with Occam's Razor and be like, this is some personal vendetta absent any other profit incentive. She's just mad. And she doesn't believe what she's saying. But anyways.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that last part. If I had to make a call about like what my final read on this book is, I would probably say that like the era of the Johnstones has passed. J.A.'s sort of like taking of the throne is an attempt to prolong the recognizability of the William Johnstone name. And this book is maybe even a follow-up to Trigger Warning that's hoping it will spark another wave of media reactions that might bring a little bit more attention to the Johnstones, and with it like more people reading and talking about their books, and it's like probably just not gonna work and they're slowly gonna fade into obscurity. I kind of think that's where it's coming from.
Absent of evidence, I can't really refute that, but again, William Johnstone is not nobody.
Yeah.
They're not on Book Talk. They're not making stupid podcasts where they pretend to talk to authors, but they're on Facebook. Let me look at the, there are 3,560 members of this William Johnstone's fan club on Facebook, and this is a moderated, like, bot-free zone. People will buy Johnstone books. I don't see the need to get attention through negativity in the way that what you're proposing is. I'm not saying that it couldn't be the case, but it feels too mean. It feels too purposefully mean for it to be, oh, I'm saying edgy things online to get attention. Look at me.
I wonder how much of that reader base is dying. Like many of those Facebook accounts might not be owned by living people.
Sure.
And it's hard to say, you know, absence of evidence, like you said, but it's just sort of a gut feeling I have.
Yeah.
But there is something mean about it that makes it feel compellingly revealing about the personality of the author, or like at least there is like in a sort of in like a morbid way, a reading of the book that's appealing like that, where you could almost extract some sense of J.A. Johnstone's like true hatred of something or other.
And that's kind of why I'm mad. Like, J.A., I'm really pissed off at you, but like I wouldn't say something like I said to Tim and K. Marie, like I did with Noah, saying that this doesn't deserve to exist. If you have this anger in your heart, there is absolutely an avenue for you to pursue with writing books about it. I just think the harm that you're causing through this can't go unstated. Again, we're not there yet. We have other things to deal with as a society, but these are real issues that you're playing with. And Trigger Warning was too, but to be fair, small town gets gentrified is a lot more of an understandable and relatable conflict than domestic terrorists hold a siege on a college and want money.
Premise-wise, I feel like this book definitely has way more potential to feel way more personal. And I almost wonder what it would look like for J.A. Johnstone to write like fully just a self-insert character as the main character of a book like this, so that like the character can just say what she's really mad about, and we can just know.
Right.
And we can really understand like what it is she wants to tell us as a writer. Because fundamentally, the written word is about communicating something, and this book has failed, in my estimation, to actually communicate a comprehensive and cogent message to us. So if it takes like a shitty self-insert to get that done, I would prefer that than this weird, like, cynical, disingenuous,
bad
cluster.
Yeah. It is kind of communicative. It's like she's trying to talk to me through this pane of glass, and I'm hearing this muffled like message through so many layers of abstraction and nuance and irony and William Johnstone's name.
Yeah.
I feel like she's screaming at me, but she can't articulate what she's saying because she needs to pretend that she is a dead Western author.
Yes.
Like,
I think that could absolutely be it. Like she wants to tell us something, but she's stuck trying to ventriloquize it using the corpse of her uncle to tell us what it is she wants to say.
Yeah. And let's pretend for a second, and to be clear, I do not believe that this was your intention, but let's pretend that you are actually trying to fulfill the mission of raising awareness through parable of this issue and trying to get people up in arms against the liberal infection of small town America or whatever.
Sure.
It's too elevated in violence and scope of the conflict to be powerful. It kind of reminds me about how in True Allegiance, Soledad Ramirez's story was so much more harrowing and so much more powerful than there's some conspiracy against me and my wife and the recently defected Texan Republic.
Yeah.
It's so much more real to imagine the government taking away your prairie that you've prized so much because of some obscure species of fish.
The smelt. It's real, and it like feels specific and real.
This is like a pet outrage that I have. There's a restaurant in a small town near St. Balasar University. It's called the Redneck Hut. It's got the word redneck in it. They are doing very, very well. They are very financially successful, and they're looking to expand and move. No one will let them because the northern rich people bought up all the land around the highway and won't let anything with the word redneck within like a 10-mile radius of it. It's not the most important thing going on in the world right now. I 100% recognize that, but like there's ways you could present this story in a more realistic and more compelling fashion. I don't know.
I totally follow you, and I agree. And I think that what this book is missing, or what it's adding, is it wants to attribute like broader social trends to like shady cabals of scary individuals that like ultimately are people that you could fight and kill.
Right.
Whereas like it's clearly not like a northern cult that has like paid people or incentivized people to move down here.
No.
It's cheaper land, and people have collectively made individual decisions to move into a place where things are cheaper and they might be able to afford more with their money.
And the implications of that are worth exploring.
The implications of that are worth exploring, and what's also worth exploring are the systems that have made that possible and the individuals that over many decades have written those systems into law.
Right.
And so, like, in a way, that is a kind of like fault you could attribute to specific named individuals, but it's not like a contemporary day gathering of people in a room who like wear dark suits and cover their faces and like scheme about how to take over the US American South from within by rotting its heart. Like, that's not happening.
Right, and that personification can only be problematic because whoever you put in that boardroom is a victim of your bigotry.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
And it's easy to do that as a writer. It's convenient, and it's easy to do that as like an actual person too, because it gives you somebody to blame. And that feels like a much more comfortable view of reality, I think, than what's actually occurring, which is that there's generations old systems that are working against most people.
I don't know. I'm kind of getting mad, and I feel kind of hypocritical for not being this mad at trigger warning. I don't know if either, like I said, the premise was just so zany that it didn't resonate with me the same way, or we weren't mature as literary critiquers as we are now with all these books under our belt. But like, what gives you the right, J.A.? Like, what gives you the right to tell this mean story with these horrible things that happen?
Not to get like personal, but like I've been thinking about similar things in my own poetry recently as well. Like when I'm writing, whenever I'm writing about a particular topic, anything, just to fill that in with whatever you want. One of the questions I've been asking myself more and more is like, what gives you the right to write about this? Not in the sense that like somebody could come in and censor you, but rather in the sense that like, is this something you're actually an expert in? Like, can you do this topic justice? And it seems to me that like J.A. doesn't really know anything about this situation and has maybe at most read about it. Does that give you the expertise necessary to talk about the very real problems that are occurring in actual like southern towns? I don't think so. I think this would be better left treated by somebody that like has firsthand experience with it, or at least has family members that have firsthand experience with it.
I keep thinking about like, should this exist? And I it's different from Noah, where I don't think it should exist. I think it's a waste of time. But this, it's kind of like what I was telling Lauren Davis. I was like, stop what you're doing and do it somewhere else in a better way. You are hurting people going down the path that you are going now. If not the abstract concept of small town America, then your uncle, who is dead and still has a legacy. I can't get over that. It's just insane to me. I guess it's the only way you can get heard as a writer, but is it worth it when you have to compromise your own voice to pass at first glance like a William Johnstone book?
That's a question that only J.A. can answer. And J.A., if you're out there, get at us. I never thought I'd see the day when using the word ma'am would be an issue. Remember the 80s and the guys in our school with long hair?
I sure do. I was envious. I dug heavy metal, but my afro would just get higher and wilder.
Gus laughed. That would have been a sight. I recall all those guys getting called ma'am all the time by mistake, especially if someone was behind them. They never blew their tops. They just laughed it off. Banks tipped his can of beer against Gus's.
Being offended wasn't a point of pride then.
He took a long sip.
Oh, is that me or you? Shit. Sorry. I thought that was you. Better days, my friend. Those were much better days.
Amen.
Well, Jay, this wouldn't be the English Club podcast if we didn't try to save these books with actionable suggestions that they could take home and pursue their goals as a novelist without compromising their vision. Anything you got on deck for old J.A.?
Even as the tide of my exhaustion with this book ate away at my ability to find things I liked about it, nothing could defeat the indefatigable bedrock of my desire to improve the book. Don't don't worry about that metaphor.
Okay.
One thing, don't worry about it. One thing that I came to fairly early on was the idea that a sort of like a common man example of a blue state native voter who had moved down to Springerville, who could be like a non-straw man representative of what like a non-evil Democrat looks like, could add some much needed nuance and texture to this book's political conversations. If the book was willing to actually consider like what a wealthy New Yorker who just moved down to Springerville would actually want as a voter. And as you've said, some of those things would be directly at odds with what a native Southerner might be comfortable with. Like, this blue state voter would probably not like the idea of something with the name redneck being like in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because it might bring down housing prices. That person is wrong in that situation because like it's like, deal with it.
Yeah.
But like that's an interesting conflict that the book could actually try to tackle if it was being honest with itself.
Understandable, compelling, conceivable,
Yeah.
not predicated on vaguely anti-Semitic ideas. I think there's a big improvement in something like that.
And there's the beginnings of that there already, because as you've mentioned a couple times now, there are people who are transplants who own stores on the main drag who eventually turn to the side of the townies. And none of those people are named or given a face or a voice, but if even one of them was and had some kind of semblance of a character arc, it would be an improvement.
There was kind of a general issue along that line where I don't want to lay this squarely at J.A. Johnstone's feet, because a lot of writers and people do this just colloquially. We're all guilty of this. Criminals, drug addicts, and liberals are all still human. So I would have loved to see a little bit more genuine dialogue between the townies and the liberals. It could have been a lot more of a cathartic moment, especially like, you know, we get this idea of the monument, but it's not really that important because they're all dead. It doesn't represent the new era of Springerville.
I really want to drive that home for anybody that might have missed it. But here at the English Club podcast, we do believe that liberals are human. And it's really important that we state that clearly and directly for anybody that had any doubts.
I was very disappointed about Sniper becoming this ultimate villain. I kind of thought he would become like a brute on Gus's side or something.
He's boring. He doesn't want anything.
Yeah, he's just like a mean guy. And again, gentrification, very problematic for a community. Crime rates generally aren't correlated with that. And I realize that, you know, the shadowy benefactors are sending these criminals over, but that's not how it works. And if it did work, the Venn diagram between drug issues and mental health issues is a circle. So I would have loved to see a little bit more attention given to like the locals that OD'd or the out-of-towners that came in with drugs.
Right.
Just to humanize them a little bit more than framing this as like a disease.
Yeah. And while we're humanizing characters that are othered, I think some similar empathy could have been given to like the school full of disabled children who at first are just an object to be protected, but then are characterized as like almost animal in the way that they like are non-verbally like wailing and screeching in fear. I found that like very disturbing as a way to characterize disabled children.
Deeply, deeply problematic.
Yeah.
It would have guessed. Why do they have to be special ed kids? Why does it have to be this specific, like, escalation of events? Like Jay said, it felt like a weird comedy where it's like, oh, it's okay, the school's abandoned. No, wait, it's not abandoned. No, wait, they're special ed kids. Like, it just ramped up and up and up in a way that, like, felt so wrong. Why couldn't it have just been school was still in session, or it was like a youth intramural league? Oh, maybe it was the gym of the local church that we could have people going to. I was thinking
church, yeah.
Yeah, like it's...
Why couldn't it just be the youth group?
Right. It's not to use this book's own language against it, but it feels token, and it furthers the kind of like, these are objects to be protected paradigm to an extent that I find not good.
I found it really interesting how the book is, if it's consistent in one thing, it's consistent in the way that the small town locals are dedicated to the safety of their small town and preserving what they imagine their small town to be against any kind of external influence. And yet, they're willing to make one exception, and that's when they killdozer the the entire trailer park.
Yes.
Which they said in that moment, it's about time we got rid of this place. It was kind of an eyesore anyway. And I'd like to remind listeners at this point that it wasn't always just the like imported drug dealers that lived there. There were actual locals that lived there that were just like stricken with poverty, and that the characters would say this place has always been an eyesore,
right,
suggests that like they don't even really care about the poor people in their own community all that much when it really comes down to it. They're willing to destroy their one place to live if it means making the town look a little bit nicer, which really isn't all that different from the liberals who want to gentrify the place, not fundamentally.
When you ask conservatives what they want to conserve. Classism is something that I feel like should have come up a little bit more, and I get that since we're in like a Mayberry dream world, it's not as much of a factor, but like strangers living in a rich person house, we don't really get a lot of description of Gus's house, oddly, as far as like whether or not it's affluent, but it feels pretty good enough, right? Like
it's close enough to downtown that he can walk to the luncheonette.
There's an omission of class that a lot of things have, so this isn't a uniquely J.A. Johnstone problem, but very interesting omission, just kind of like with the Christianity thing. Where are the poor people? Where are the Christians?
Two of the most oppressed groups in our society.
Truly. Why did you use Comic Sans? Why did you use giant Comic Sans all caps text? That was ridiculous.
She was going Gothicana mode on that one.
That's a dog whistle. Like you don't do that. You don't do that unless you're trying to get attention.
Yeah, who was it dog whistling? I don't know, but we heard it.
Us.
Hey, if that makes us dogs, then so be it.
Oh, here's a suggestion. Where was Dog the Bounty Hunter from Trigger Warning? I was really disappointed by the lack of connective tissue.
Yeah, and his lackey Stallion.
See, that would have been a good thing to come in. Like instead of Gus, they called in Stallion and Dog to fight Sniper in this special ed classroom. That would have saved this book, let me tell you. I feel like Roger was pretty underutilized. You can file him in under like everyone else in the narrative, but there's, like we mentioned, a brief mention of him having lived in Springerville, but then he disappears off screen. I don't know why we had all of that build up for that to happen. It felt kind of rushed. Having him back in as maybe like an ally figure, even more so than Stranger would have been, I think would have been nice.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like when I read the book, I actually thought I had missed something. The way that Roger disappeared off screen. I was kind of waiting in your summary for you to say something that I would be like, oh, I didn't catch that.
Nope.
But no, it's not there anymore. I guess in hindsight, all of that setup of him being kind of not so dedicated to the cause was meant to suggest that he was ready to run. But then also there were moments where Stranger was threatening him with his career and saying like, you know, if you run, I'm going to tell people, I'm going to let it get out that you were caught up in this like a election rigging scandal.
Yeah.
But then he runs anyway. So are we supposed to assume that he's not going to get caught because Stranger was killed, or I don't know. Like you would think that the Cabal would then come after him. So something's definitely missing from that.
Oh, I feel like a lot of pieces are missing from this. God, J.A., I want you on the show so bad.
This book is billing itself as a rip from the headlines thriller, and we know it's set during the Biden presidency because it talks about the Trump presidency, the first one.
Right.
So we know it's not Trump again, and we know that Trump isn't in a second non-consecutive term because if he was, it would have mentioned that. So this has to be set during the Biden presidency by a process of elimination. I don't know how else to put this other than like, if any of this were happening, then this would be happening. And it's not happening, so it's not happening. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, on that aforementioned fan site, I saw someone comment on the post announcing the release of Not My Home. They said, I didn't know the Johnstones were writing documentaries now, so maybe there's someone out there who believes it.
I guess there's someone out there who really thinks that is what's happening to their small town. You got to give it to them. They know how to manufacture a conspiracy theory. I wouldn't have even known how to turn gentrification of small southern towns into a conspiracy that could be pinned on wealthy urban elites, but they did it. And that's impressive in its own sadistic way.
I don't think they're saving this one. I'm gonna scour the backlog of J.A. Johnstone books to see if there's any more information I can get. Because like I knew in Trigger Warning that she wasn't gung-ho. And I don't know, see, this is the problem, is like I don't know if William Johnstone was like this in his books. Like, I'll give the benefit of the doubt. He was probably a curmudgeonly old conservative in life. And I imagine if that's not your cup of tea, that was probably very alienating and annoying. And there's probably a lot of rage associated with being forced to hang out with someone like that for your writing career. However, I was not expecting for it to be as mean as it was. I picked this one up because someone on the Discord mentioned that it was coming out, and the parallels with my own personal life I thought were too compelling to pass up. But I almost regret it in a way, because this is not the world that I live in.
Yeah.
Neither was Trigger Warning, but like Trigger Warning wasn't pretending to be. And I don't like this pattern. I don't like the way that things are moving.
Not to circle back to like how genuine is this, but what you just said about maybe J.A. Johnston like sort of resenting conservatives despite being one herself because she had to spend so much time around her curmudgeonly old uncle in order to be a successful writer. Like that confluence of weird and like kind of contradictory, but also like still true beliefs and feelings would explain this book really well as a book. Like maybe she's a conservative that like really genuinely doesn't like what she perceives like liberals and left-wing people to be, but like also resents conservatives for the way that she has been treated by them. And this is a weird and confused expression of both of those rages.
So what, she's like the ultimate enlightened centrist?
No, I think it's possible that she is still a conservative that holds conservative values, but just doesn't like the conservatives that she's around.
I need to think on that a lot more, because that's cogent. The one thing that the right consistently fails at is women.
Yeah.
So a lot of women who would otherwise be conservative are being alienated by a political party that does not handle their issues very well. I could totally see what you're saying, where she's kind of in this adrift state, alienated by both sides, and this is just her shouting into the void.
And another group that overlaps with conservatives is American Christians, and that might explain its absence, is that she doesn't like them either, but like doesn't really have as much to say about it, or can't be quite as mean to it without alienating more of her readership.
So it's like an insult by omission.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could think of a couple reasons that modern American women might be mad at modern American Christians. You're getting my wheels spinning. I might have to think on this a little bit more. We'll talk more about it on the Discord, because I actually really want to follow this thread as far as I can.
I would be really genuinely interested on other people's reads, because I feel like having read this and Trigger Warning, I'm kind of spinning my wheels at this point, trying to figure out how this book could exist. And yet it does.
Nevertheless, she persisted.
Despite everything, it's still you, J.A. Johnstone.
Yeah, J.A. Johnstone's in her genocide arc, and we're Flowey.
Well, Andrew, I don't know if you noticed, but it's getting awfully late out there. It seems like our reserved time for the club room has run out yet again, so it might be time to shut the book on this one, if you know what I'm saying.
Shut up.
And get on with our nights.
Yeah, I have a lot of scouring the internet for William Johnstone content to do. I'm actually more invigorated to solve this mystery than I was going into it, so definitely expect to hear a lot more from me on the Discord talking about this.
I hope you find something that's maybe even video essay worthy on this. That scholarship is sorely lacking.
I feel things coming together. If not, we can just do like a long J.A. Johnstone explained kind of video.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Keep an eye out for that, who knows. But J.A. and Will, we're so glad you guys came back. I know that you're feeling a lot more represented now that we have Ben Shapiro in the midst with you. And I do recommend you hang out with Lauren M. Davis outside of the club, because I think you guys have a lot more in common than you think. But until we meet again, I have been Andrew.
I've been Jay.
And we will see you guys both around campus.
See ya. Gus let Emma wrap her arm around his waist to support him. "We're going to be okay," he said, looking around the town. His town. Their town.
We are. We just have a lot of work to do.
Work is something I can do. As they headed for their car, they passed his luncheonette. The builders said it would be ready by late May. Gus couldn't wait to make biscuits in his new oven.
Biscuits, biscuits, biscuits. Every freaking thing they talk about centers around...
It's the only Southern food they know.
Right. Oh my god, can't wait to get into that. Shit, it makes me so mad. I'm never gonna eat another biscuit in my life, just out of spite.
I will never say the word luncheonette.